All right, so we're taking a look at our second part of literal equations. We have a problem up here for you, 2x plus 5 equals 11. We're going to solve for x. Now you should know how to do this. This is a two-step equation here where you have to get rid of the constant and then get rid of the coefficient. However, we know that you should know how to do this already, but we're going to use it to show you how to solve a literal equation where all these numbers are actually letters. So let's go ahead and solve this one to remind us of all those steps. First things first, let's go ahead and throw that lollipop up there. That's right, we have to make sure that both equations are, both expressions on the side, each side of the equation are separate. We have our left side and our right side. And now we're going to start identifying in all of our parts. So let's start by identifying our variables. What are we solving for? Solving for x, so that tells me my variable. It's also the only letter here in my equation, but what I want you guys to start getting used to looking for is what it's asking you to solve for. Solve for x. So remember that we circle the variable, and then we got to look for our coefficient. The coefficient always touches the variable. In this case, what's touching the variable? 2. So we're going to underline that. And then lastly, identifying our constant. It's on the same side of the equation as what we're solving for, in this case x, but not touching the variable, which would be our positive 5. And don't forget that positive, or if it were negative, be sure to identify that as well. And then we just go through those steps. Get rid of the constant and get rid of the coefficient. So let's get rid of that constant. The constant is plus 5, and the way that we get rid of a plus is to minus. And the subtraction property of equality says if I subtract 5 from the left-hand side, that I do have to do it to the other. Gotta do it to the other side as well. 5 minus 5 is 0. Now I don't have to bring that 0 down, but I should bring everything else down. I'm going to keep everything nice and organized. 11 minus 5 is 6. And now I still have my variable and my coefficient. When we get rid of our coefficients, in this case, our coefficient is touching the x with multiplication, and so we are going to divide by 2 on both sides. It's the division property of equality. If you divide one side by 2, you got to divide the other side by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so it leaves us with just the x over here, 1x. You don't need to write the 1, it's implied. And then 6 divided by 2, which is 3.
That was easy.
It's not too bad. That's just a two-step equation. Now we're going to show you a two-step literal equation. What we have here is ax plus b equals c. And remember, what are we solving for?
X.
We're solving for x. So that's going to be the variable that we're solving for. I know that all of these are variables, but the one that's important to us to get alone and to isolate is x. So I'm going to circle the x. Right? Now another thing I should do is also make sure that I'm dividing my equation in half so I know the left hand from the right hand side. So let's go ahead and throw our lollipop. And now let's continue identifying our parts. Our next thing to identify after the variable x is to identify the coefficient. The coefficient always touches the variable that we're solving for. So in this case, what's touching x?
A.
We have a here, so I'm going to underline that once to identify it as the coefficient. And then I'm going to identify the constant. The constant is on the same side as the variable, but not touching the variable. Right? So that's going to be not just b, but positive b. And then we're going to do the same thing like we did over here. We're going to get rid of the constant, and then we're going to get rid of the coefficient. The constant is the thing not touching. The coefficient is the one touching the variable. So how would I get rid of the constant over here, b? Well, it says plus b, and we get rid of constants by adding or subtracting. The way that we get rid of plus is to subtract. And if I subtract off the left-hand side, the subtraction property of equality says that I need to do it on the other side as well. That's a funky-looking b. All right, so what's left over here? Let's go ahead and do that math. I've got ax still left over. I didn't touch that. B minus b is going to be 0, so I'm going to note that here. I'm not going to write the 0. Bring down my equal sign, and then it says c minus b. Well, I don't know what c is, and I don't know what b is. Those aren't like terms, so I'm going to just leave it as c minus b. It's that simple. However, we're not done. We still have the variable x to solve for. It's not isolated. It's not alone. I still have the variable and the coefficient touching it. And the way that we get rid of coefficients is either going to be by multiplication or division, but because this is multiplying a times x, we're going to get rid of the multiplication by dividing. And because I'm dividing one side, I have to divide
The other side,
Yeah.
not just a C or the B.
That's right. We have to make sure that we're dividing everything. Okay? This is the division property of equality. If I divide one side, I have to divide all of the other side as well. In this case, we're dividing by A. And yes, we do need to divide all of the C minus B. A divided by A
Is 1.
is 1. It leaves us with X equals, well, what's all that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. So it's just going to be left as C minus B all over A.
Mr. Nelson, last year my teacher told me that everything has to be in alphabetical order.
Yeah, you could technically rewrite this. The only issue is you can't just pop this A out in front because it's in the denominator. And so if you wanted to, this is another way you could rewrite it. This is acceptable. But another way that we could write it, we're going to leave the A in the denominator. But if you wanted to, you could write this as negative B and then plus C.
But that makes it look harder to me.
Yeah, it looks a little harder. So we are completely okay with this right here.
Okay.
Okay? So the next step after this is now to actually apply the literal equation that we just solved for, okay? We're going to evaluate x when a is 2, b is 5, and c is 17. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this down here so you guys can see exactly what we're doing. C minus b all over a. And so first things first, it says that a equals 2. So I need to replace this a with 2, and that's called substitution. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. So that's going to be 2. It also says that b equals 5, so I need to replace that b with
5.
5. So I'm going to put that 5 right here. Don't forget this minus sign. And it's also replacing c, right? So this c needs to be replaced with 17. So there's my new problem. And here's the thing now, is I can solve for all of this. I know what 17 minus 5 is, right? Now we just got to go through the simplifying process, starting with GEMDAS, grouping symbols. And grouping symbols are, remember, numerators are grouping symbols, and denominators are too. So we're going to start there. What is 17 minus 5?
12.
That's just 12. Now I don't have to leave the parentheses up there because it's all done. And then in the denominator is 2, and 12 divided by 2 is
6.
It's the only problem left, so we get 6. So x equals 6. And that's how you do a two-step literal equation.
Cool.
Make sure you pause the video and get all that written down. All right, well, let's move on to what looks like a harder problem, but really isn't. There's only really one more step that we have to, not one more step, but one thing we just have to identify and make sure you guys have down. We have ax plus by equals c. We're still going to go through all the process of doing the lollipop. This one is actually a standard form for equations of lines. Straight lines, we're going to get to that a little bit later. But you will be needing to be able to solve for any of these variables here. So if we said solve for x, you should be able to get x all by itself. If we said solve for b, you should be able to get b all by itself. In this case, you have to solve for x. That's it. Okay? So let's start by splitting the equation in half. Let's get that lollipop up there. All right, so there's my lollipop. Let's identify our variable. What are we solving for?
X.
X. It says so right here. Therefore, that's my variable that I need to isolate. All right, now let's go and identify our coefficient. Is anything touching x? Well, yeah. A is touching x. That makes it a coefficient. Okay? And then we also have this by. Now, this is where students start to get confused. Well, what ones are they both coefficients? No. Are they both constants? No. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
They're on the same. Yeah, because they're
Well,
not touching.
it's on the same side as the variable that we're solving for, but they're not touching x. So both of these right here are a constant. We can get rid of both of those by saying minus by, and then say bye. That was funny. Come on. Anyway, that's how we're going to do this. Now we have all this over here to identify that as well. So I'm going to do that. That's how you guys would go about this. I'm going to identify it, make sure that we're following along. So we have red is our variable. We said that x was our variable. I'm going to go back through that. That's what we're solving for. we said that a is our coefficient, so I'm going to mark it in blue. And then we have plus by as our constant. But don't forget to identify the plus as part of your constant. And then b, and then y. All right, so now we have to do our order of solving, which starts with simplifying, which we don't have anything to simplify here. And get rid of the constant, get rid of the coefficient. We've already identified the constant in green here. Constant is plus by. Now, how would you get rid of a plus?
Minus.
Yeah, that's right, minus. Constants will always be a plus or a minus, which means you're always going to get rid of them by doing the opposite of what they are. So if we subtract a by from this side, the subtraction property of equality says that we need to subtract the by off the other side as well. And what is by minus by?
0.
0. What's left?
A,
right? X. Now I'm going to keep this all color-coded for you. Equals. Well, I thought equals. I guess equals. Equals. The by minus by is just 0, so we don't need to write that down. And then what is C minus by?
I don't know.
Well, that's just C minus by. That's not the right color. C minus by. I don't know why it keeps doing that.
I think your shoulders getting too close to the wall.
Of course it is. Minus by. Am I done?
No.
No. I still have the coefficient to get rid of. Now, how do you get rid of a times x? How do you get rid of the a?
The opposite.
Do the opposite of multiply, which is to divide.
Division property of equality.
Division property of equality says I need to do it to both sides, but do I just do it to C?
No.
No, I do it to the whole side of that expression, okay? Divide both sides by a. A divided by a is 1, so I'm left with x equals C minus by all over a. Just like on the last problem, we don't know what any of those are. So there is our literal equation solved for x. Make sure you guys have that written down. All right, so here's another one. Let me erase this real quick. Here's our other one. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you guys to try this one. You are solving for a. Now, if you get stumped, that's fine. Just try it. All right, so here we are. We're going to solve for a. A is our variable, so we are going to, I'm just going to identify it with this right here. A is our variable.
That's what we're solving for.
Because it tells me that's what we're solving for, right? A. So what does that make x?
Coefficient.
And why is x the coefficient?
It's touching the A.
It's touching the a. Now, usually the coefficient is on the left-hand side. Now, this is where students really make mistakes with coefficients and variables. We say solve for a, and then our students go and solve for x. And so we say, what's a? And then we get everyone's assignment in where we said everyone solve for x. So this is where you got to really pay attention. At the very end, we're going to come back and double check this. Make sure that we have a alone. So we have a as our variable, x as our coefficient. What does that make the plus by?
The constant.
The constant. But don't forget to identify that it's positive. Plus
Operation.
by. That operation is really important because that's going to tell us how to get rid of the constant, right? All right, well, there we go. What am I missing?
My lollipop.
Need my lollipop.
Ba-dum, boom, boom.
All right. First thing that we get rid of always is the constant. How do we get rid of plus by?
Minus.
Just like on the last problem, we are going to minus by. Subtraction property of equality says to subtract it off of both sides, though. By minus by is 0. That leaves me with a, x, my variable, my coefficient, equals c minus by is just c minus by. Still got to get rid of my coefficient, but let's remember, what was the coefficient?
X.
X
That's why
is
people make
not the
mistakes.
variable. This is where people make the mistake. They'll circle it thinking it's the variable. But x is not the variable. A is the variable, which makes x the coefficient. So how do I get rid of the coefficient if it's times by x? Divide by, not a, because if I divide by a, I will have solved for x. I'm not solving for x. I need to divide by x. X divided by x?
1.
1 leaves me with A equals C minus BY all over X.
Ooh, that looks ugly.
That's it. Make sure you guys have that written down. Make sure that your work is good. Make any corrections that you need to make in your notes. All right, so go ahead and finish those next few problems that you've got. And then we're going to move on to factoring.